Welcome this evening. Just as a start, we're going to do a quick announcement. There are some folks in the community who have been great supporters and mentors of mine and colleagues over time, and they have put together a flyer that they want to share with folks, and I said I'd be happy to have you hand them to people on the way out. So there's one person who's going to make an announcement about this, and it's all related to kind of the politics of the day. So Ron over here is going to come over and make an announcement about what this is. And I'm just going to hand you the mic for a second, Ron.
Evening. I'm part of a group that 3 years ago, in the wake of a certain guy getting elected president, was pretty depressed, and 36 of us got together and decided to put a group together called Proactive Persistent People for Progress, or P4 for short. And we've been working on a variety of things at the federal, state, and local level over the last 3 years. We meet monthly, been doing some good stuff. But we noticed that a lot of our neighbors, friends, family members, they all say they want to do something, but then they get busy, taking care of kids, going on trips, whatever. It wasn't getting done. So we decided to help them by coming up with a nice, simple flyer that says, this is something you can do in 5 minutes, this is something you can do in 15 minutes, this is something you do in 30 minutes, or 2 hours. And if you get really engaged, come join us at Common Purpose. So anyway, we're going to hand this out at the end. We hope that you will take it, make copies on your own. You can also, because we're trying to be modern 21st century people, we put together a website and you can download it. And the important thing is that it gets shared, because this is how we think we can beat Trump and take back the Senate. So please pick one up on the way out.
All right, I wanted to, Ron took the sign. I wanted to do what, the sign twirlers, right? I wanted to go for it. Yeah. Just gonna give it a twirl. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. It's okay. Welcome tonight to Lecture 3 of the series, the 9-part series, or if you're just here for January, the 3-part series on the 2020 presidential election. Tonight's the last of the first 3, talking about the Democrats, and going to talk about some candidates today. I will, at the end of this lecture, talk about the New York Times endorsement, in case some of you have asked about that going in. And I will also do Q&A tonight if you have questions, okay? So I'll set aside 15 minutes or so at the end if you want to do questions. So welcome tonight. Thanks for coming out on this lovely evening here in Seattle. That's a joke. And for being here for this whole series. The lecture's overview, 3 acts this year. First act on the Democrats, the second act on the Republicans, and a third act on the nation and where we are in our election kind of process. The 3 lectures that comprise the first act started with the National Crucible, talking about another moment in America when it looked like things might not go on in the Civil War, and 1864 as a moment in time that can call to us today around a new birth of freedom. The nomination roadmaps last time, talking about Iowa and South Carolina, Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. There are about little over 20 folks that are signed up and going on the Iowa Civic tour with us. We'll be there next Tuesday. We'll get on the ground there in Iowa. They're looking at the weather forecast. It's got snow. So I am fired up, all right? Because I'm looking forward to this. Will I wear shorts? No, I won't. No. And then there are some of you that have asked about South Carolina. You couldn't make the conference call the other day. If you're interested in our South Carolina trip, which occurs at the end of February, you can contact me, and I'll just talk to you one-on-one if you couldn't make the call the other day. There's still some seats available there. The Iowa trip is now done. The deadline's passed. And today I want to talk about the kind of key candidates, the key contenders in this election. And obviously, there's fewer than it was a month or two ago. And I'm going to focus mostly on the folks who are still in the campaign and are significant possibilities to win the election. All right. So today, the contenders, January 21st. I'm actually back to this date. I'm counting the days of this year by just number. All right, so we're on day 21 of this really vital year. All right, so day 21, and I'm going to count all the way through. I will, of course, have to pivot to talk about months of the year starting next month. But the reality is that each day counting like that helps me to focus on the fact that every single day I can do something. All right, it isn't just January 21. It is day 21. All right, the presidency. That's not what the entire lecture series is about, but it's a good chunk of what the lecture series is about. And I want to go back in time to December of 2012. Because I just would like to go back to that. But I would like to go back in time to December 2012. This is 1 month and I think 4 days, or 1 month and 5 days after the election of November 2012. And in that election in 2012, we had the highest number of females ever elected to the U.S. Senate. 20, okay, in the U.S. Senate. That's 20%. When you look at other Western democracies, a level of females and women in leadership is so much lower than most other democracies. All kinds of interesting, concerning, just all kinds of reasons for why that is. But in that election in 2012, we had the most we'd ever had. We had 20. And on December 12th, 2012, Diane Sawyer, well-known, famous ABC News reporter and anchor, gathered 19 of the 20, tried to get all 20, but I think one of them couldn't make it, in the same room for a question and answer kind of interview with she went for the 20. She went for them all. And she gathered them in the room, and I want to go back to that moment, okay? So Sawyer says, "Is there a president in this room?" All right? And Amy Klobuchar says, 20 of them, all right? And lots of women say 20. Like, yeah, 20. And Sawyer says 20 of them? And then Barbara Mikulski, who is just a veteran, a hero in this struggle, says a succession of them at least, right? Maybe not 20, but a succession of them. And that is all really interesting, just right there. That I could stop the transcript. What an interesting word that is. I could stop the transcript right there. But the quote that comes after this is also really quite important, okay? And it's from one of ours, Patty Murray. Huh, interesting. There we go. Patty Murray says, I think the thing is that every man wakes up in the morning and looks in the mirror and says, I could be president. I think every woman looks in the mirror and says, what can I get done for my country today? All right? And I don't know if every man wakes up in the morning and says that, because I don't, okay? But I think that every man who's in Congress does, right? Because when you're in Congress, you're somebody. You've been elected. You have been voted into office, unless you've been appointed and then you have to win re-election. But you've gotten people to buy what you're selling, in essence, all right? So I start with this because obviously we have two of the kind of finalists on the Democratic side, major candidates who are potentially going to win, who are females. And also because of the kind of interesting dynamics that this brings up with some of the arguments that are being made by some of the contenders today. What will I do and how will I function? Okay? All right. Candidates make all kinds of decisions / calculations about running for president. Anybody who's going to think about running for president has to assess a number of things if they're logical, if they're wise about this. There was in one of the debates, the Democratic debates, Andrew Yang said something late in the debate where he said something like, I didn't grow up wanting to run for president because I'm not insane. All right? All right? It was something like that. But there is this set of calculations that candidates go through, and you ought to, if you're going to then ask people to basically either come work for you, give you money, or at least vote for you. And those are big asks. Those are big lifts. So you ought to go through a process. So I want to talk about what I call a matrix of candidate calculations. All right? And I want to suggest that there's kind of a 4-part process to this. 4 kind of set of considerations that candidates who are going to run for the presidency ask of themselves and of others. And these are calculations that candidates go through generally, but they have to be thought of through generally in terms of any race, but they have to be thought through at a much higher level if you're going to run for the presidency. All right? So the first question they got to ask is where is the United States at these days? What's our status? What are we at? How are we doing? How are we doing domestically? How are we doing in the economy? How are we doing globally? So it's an assessment of the United States' standing in the world and also just kind of domestically. A second question is, what is the U.S. public's, and I have plural here on purpose, what does the U.S. public seem to be wanting, or how are they feeling these days? All right, what's the kind of mood of the United States public's? And am I going to be a person who can connect with that? All right. So first one, U.S. status, and can I be someone who helps with that? Second, what is the kind of mood of the public, and do I connect with that? There is a large body of research in political science on what's called public mood, which is a general kind of feeling and a whole host of measures that are put together in kind of an index of how the public feels about the world, about themselves, about the economy. And so they get put into a kind of combination of public mood, and it's quite predictive of presidential election outcomes. A third thing to consider is, what about my opponents that I would run against? What about them? Are they beatable? Can I offer something that they can't offer? Chris Christie in 2011 was a very hot candidate on the Republican side. Up and coming, moderate Republican in New Jersey. And there was a lot of folks who wanted him to run on the Democratic side, on the Republican side, because they thought he'd be a better candidate nationally than a Mitt Romney. And Chris Christie looked at it and looked at Obama and said, I don't think I can beat Barack Obama, and my chance will come in 4 years. And it doesn't quite work that way. All right? You assess what you have there and then in terms of your opponents, and you say, do I have an opening? Is there a set of things I can offer that my opponents can't offer, or I can convince people that I can offer better than them? So you assess your opponents. That does include the sitting incumbent candidate, if there is one. It also includes people in your own party. And then lastly, and it usually is the last assessment, is the assessment of self. Because the reason it's usually the last one is because you really have to, if you're going to do this right, you got to think about these other things and then map yourself onto this. You should be, in the best, carefully thought through calculations, doing all of this without really thinking about, do I fit this or not? And then you assess self. That's the most logical reason why self would come last. What's more reasonable expectation for why it comes last is because they already have decided that they're spectacular. And so there isn't really any doubt about this. It's just a matter of kind of going through all these other things and seeing it's kind of I'm really great, and do these other things kind of line up? So, but all 4 of these come into play, and I've got it last because I want to spend the most time on it in the lecture here. But you could reasonably see it being first, too. I'm the greatest thing ever, and I am going to run because I'm just great, all right? But I want to use these 4-part matrices to think about the calculations that candidates make. in deciding to run. Let's start with number one, assessment of U.S. status. And I want to focus, in this case, on the 2020 Democratic primary, okay? I want to focus on this not just in the abstract. I want to take this abstract matrix and use it to specifically think about right now. So you're a candidate in 2012, 2016, and you're thinking about, do I want to run for presidency? Now we get towards 2020, and candidates usually begin to think hard about this sometime in the kind of during the midterm elections before this. They begin to decide on this. So in 2018, there were lots of decisions being made about whether candidates were going to run in 2020. So they start to think about all these things. And let's start with number one, the assessment of U.S. status. Well, I think that anybody would reasonably assess that there are problems all around. There are problems on any front. You can stand on a street corner in Winslow, Arizona, and you can see problems everywhere, okay? The reality is there are problems all around us, and so I think that's a reasonable assessment, from climate to racial injustices, to economic dislocation, to immigration, xenophobia, to not even having a reasonable plan to deal with immigration in a positive way, all kinds of things, problems all around. That's what I think a Democratic candidate would conclude right now. So they'd say, all right, there's enough bad things, difficulties, problems, that it's worthwhile for me to think about running. And there is one issue domain that matters more than any other issue domains, all right? And I'm sorry to say, in Seattle, with this kind of pro-environmental concerns, that's not it, all right? That isn't it. It's the economy, all right? What is the status of the economy? And so I think a Democratic candidate today, but they would have said the same thing in 2018, would say this, that the economy is good. Now, I understand, progressives, that we can argue about the ways that the economy is not good. The economic inequality, the people being left behind. I get all that. But when you look at the measures that traditionally define a good economy, unemployment levels, the kind of levels of manufacturing or wages in our society, when you look at the stock market, these are measures that I'll talk about in lecture 4, and on every one of these indicators, Trump is at record positive levels. Okay? So I agree with you. There are many people that are not receiving the economy and it's not going well for them. But in the aggregate, the public says the economy's good. Point of evidence. The CNN poll that came out yesterday, which shows Donald Trump's public approval ratings at 43%, which is right where it generally is. So this is not an odd poll. This is not an outlier poll. Has him at 43% approval, 53% disapproval. Only on 2 approval issue areas does he have a positive public approval, on 2 issue areas. On the economy, 55% approve of him on the economy. 55 approve, 40 disapprove for him on the economy. That's how you win re-election, all right? So anybody looking at the calculus in 2020 as a Democrat would have bet in 2018 that you got a plan that is going to be good. You can't bank on it being bad, and you don't really want to bank on it going bad. That's not the right ethical thing as a person in leadership. So you'd have to come to this conclusion. Okay, so quadrant 1 is there are problems everywhere. I would like to try to help those. But the reality is the generally positive economy is going to help the sitting president. Okay? Assessment of U.S. publics. What's the U.S. public kind of feeling? What's the energy? It's like happy, right? That's a joke, people, okay? The public in the United States, in any quadrant, is not happy. They're not happy at all. All right? They're angry. We exist in a period of tremendous political polarization in which anger and fear and enormous energy is present. This is a really tough environment to run for election in. If you're sitting in a strong Democratic congressional district and you're a Democrat, solid, you're fine. But you're trying to win the only national election that we have. Could it be any tougher? of a political environment in terms of the public's feelings on this issue, on kind of like the world right now, this is a really tough time to run for president. And I want to talk about energy for a second. Energy, people in Seattle, well, I think people generally extrapolate and generalize from their experiences of the world and assume that others must think or feel the same. They must. So in Seattle, it's a stunner. We can't even imagine how it is that 53 sitting Republican senators would vote the way they voted today in impeachment, right? That's not the outcome of the trial, but they've made a set of important decisions today. How is that possible? It's really difficult for us to assess that. In that same CNN poll, they asked people a question about level of enthusiasm for voting in 2020. How enthusiastic are you? And this is all a self-report question. So the reality is that people are trying to self-assess, and I would love at another time to kind of I've spent my career doing kind of self-assessment work in social science research, asking people questions, and you built into these sets of questions is the assumption that people can actually tell you what they think. That's a flawed premise, okay? All right? But you believe it in order to do the questions. So the question is like this. It goes like this. How enthusiastic are you about voting in 2020? And the potential response options are extremely, very, moderately, not at all. Okay? Extremely, very. So like how to parse those two is tough. But extremely, very, moderately, not at all. In the percent that said extremely, which is a very high percentage in 2020, right? And progressives say, oh my God, that's really great, really high percent of extremely. That must mean we're fired up. When you look at the approval ratings for Trump among the extremelies, Trump has a 57% approval rating among the extremelies. Okay? You know who's extremely fired up to vote in 2020? It ain't anybody sitting in this room. It is people all over this country who see their president getting impeached right now. And they say, motherfuckers, we're going to get you back. So let's just know that. I start with the premise in 2020 that the likelihood is that Donald Trump will be reelected. That's where I stand. All right? So that energy out there is not just correlated with get him out. That anger and fear and energy is also correlated with folks who put Trump into office and are determined they're going to keep him. All right? That's a tough environment for a Democratic candidate to run him. Okay. It's not going very well if you're a Democratic candidate assessing things so far, right? How about opponents? Well, we'll start with Trump. We know Trump is vicious and insecure, and he will fight till his death on anything, and will make short-sighted, narcissistic decisions. We know all of these things about Donald Trump. That's who he is, and that's who he's going to be all the way through the time he's alive. All right, so that's fun to run against. Okay, if you're kind of assessing who you're going to run against, you're like, oh, cool, I want that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to taking him on, right? And then among the Democratic opponents, you would look around as a Democratic nominee and say, there's a lot. Holy cow, there's a lot. The most we've ever had in terms of being kind of major candidates on the Democratic side. So again, if you're the candidate, if you're an Amy Klobuchar, who says to Diane Sawyer in 2012 that there's 20 women in this room, and she decides to run for president in 2020, then you're looking around and you're saying, okay, the economy is good in the eyes of most people, and it's going to probably stay there. This is a really tough environment to win election, especially someone who's going to try to appeal to moderates, like Klobuchar is. And there's going to be a lot of opponents, and I'm going to run against a guy that is absolutely going to be brutal and a bully all the way. So what we should really be surprised is that anybody does this, right? I mean, there was a time in my life, like 10 or 15 years ago, when my wife said, there is no way in hell you're ever running for office. And I said, I would never want to run for office. And she goes, that's good, because if you do, I will not be there with you, okay? All right? Because who would want to go through this? Well, if you're an egotistical candidate, maybe you will, but what about the rest of your family, right? So I want to just spend a moment on this, the many opponents, okay? All right, just want to kind of spend a minute on that. Let's go back to the first Democratic debate, okay? You might recall there were 2 nights of debate. There were 10 candidates one night, and there were 10 on the other night. 2 back-to-back nights. 20 total. And it was that way for a couple of the first debates. This was in June of 2019. And then I think there were 20 for July, and there wasn't one in August. They skipped August. So maybe it was just June and July. There were 20. All right, so you guys are really dialed into American politics. And I know that, like, you remember all these candidates really well, okay? Okay, so I'm going to show you their faces. And then I'm going to give you 2 minutes, okay, to try to see if you can name all 20. You're going to do it with sitting next to a person that's right there. I'm helping you by giving you the pictures, all right? So you just go ahead and see if anybody can get all 20. Okay, go ahead, 2 minutes right now. I know it's a little blurry. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So what we're going to do, just for fun here, is I'm going to point to a particular candidate. I'll go over and stand next to them. Point to a particular candidate, and if you know who that candidate is, or you think you do, you'll yell their name out loud. Okay? But don't get ahead of me, please, just so we can have fun. And we're going to start with the ones that you're going to probably know. All right? So let's see. Who's this up here? Yes. Solid. Who's this? Yeah, well, let's go with last names. I'll make it even easier for you. Just the last names, all right? This guy? Sanders. Okay, you're 3 for 3. Right here? Yes. I miss her. Yep. Right here? O'Rourke. But there weren't as many of you saying it there, okay? Okay, right here? Right here. Okay. Okay. There's not as many voices out there. Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah. I'm really proud of Jay and the campaign he ran, right? Yeah. Plus those glasses, my wife's been like, you could get some of those Jay Inslee glasses, all right? Okay. Oh, you got Swalwell, all right. Bennett. Delaney. He's still in. We're going to see him in Iowa next week, all right? Because he's not a congressman anymore. He was in Maryland, and he's not. So what else is he going to do, right? Come on, we know. Hickenlooper. This one? De Blasio. I think there's just one left, right? Ryan, Tim Ryan from Ohio. So there's a few that aren't even up there, right? That aren't up there. So who wouldn't be up there? I mean, Bloomberg and Patrick. Steyer's not up there either, right? Bullock's not up there, right? So, okay. So you're looking at the list. I mean, you're looking at the field about the people that are going to likely run, and everybody kind of looks at Trump, and they say the economy's really, the candidates are doing the calculus. They're like, the economy's good, or at least people think it's good, and we're going to live with that, and he's going to be really tough to run against. But because so many people think Trump is vulnerable, as he is in many respects, a lot of candidates run, all right? So I want to, that's 20 I just showed you. When you run for president of the United States, you have to file with the Federal Election Commission a statement that you're a candidate for president, and you can start to raise money, all right? So you can see names on here. This is, if you go to this web page, you would be able to do the searches that are on here and filter for president in this election cycle, and you would get a list of folks. So you see names down here, and it keeps going down. I just showed you 20, but go ahead in your mind and come up with a number that you think is actually the number of candidates who have filed to become president of the United States. Okay, go ahead. What? Is there a filing fee? I don't think there is. I don't think so. No. All right. So this was as of 2 weeks ago when I was putting the lecture together, or this portion of the lecture together. What I'm about to show you is the number of people in the United States who have filed with the Federal Election Commission to be a candidate for president of the United States, okay? That number is 1,042, okay? So, anybody in here? Anybody? Right over here? No? Oh, that's an umbrella. I thought it was an arm up. All right. Okay. 1,042, right? And it's a really fascinating thing to scroll down. All right? Because obviously you get past names that you know pretty quickly, and to see the people that have filed. So there's a lot. There's a lot of opponents. Many, many opponents that you would be up against. All right. Quadrant 4. So let's think about quadrant 4 for a second. So I've had the great privilege to have many of you come to lectures that I've done over time. It's an honor I enjoy these a great deal. I look forward to them, and I'm energized by it. If I were to come in wearing a suit, right, and to never occasionally drop the F-bomb, and to be a diehard Republican, right, it would be disconcerting to say the least, and it would also, you would doubt the authenticity of all of that. You would say either you've been lying to us or you're lying to us now. One way this isn't true, right? I could make the argument that I've changed, and you would be skeptical, and you'd watch me for a long time to see if you buy that or not. The reason I use this example is that when you're going to run for president, you are not coming out of the laboratory unknown to people at that moment. You have a long record in the public eye prior to making this move. And you have to navigate that historical reality. So when you assess self, you have to take into account who are you as you're understood by others. All right? You have to take into account that there is already a set of ideas about who you are, and you have to navigate that. So the questions around self are actually twofold, and they both take this into account. First, who can I claim I am? When you go on a first date, you theoretically can, construct yourself right there. I am this. I am funny. I'm, rich. You could say whatever you want to say, right? In our world today, maybe you probably can't do that because you've probably been looked up by somebody on a date before, so you can't quite start from scratch there. But you have more of an opportunity to do that than you do as you're running for president. You have to look around and say, who can I plausibly claim I am? Who can I claim I am? And second, what can I plausibly claim that I'll do? These are the two questions that you face as a candidate if you're going to think about running for president. You can't just claim things. It has to be plausible given who you have been. All right? And this is one of the great mistakes of many people who run for office at this level. It's you have to align your claims of who you are and what you will do with a record, because the one time that you know that everything about you will be vetted will be if you run for president. Things will come out, your opponents will make sure your history is brought to the fore, everything will be discussed, and you'll have to answer for it all. So who can I claim I am, and what can I claim I'll do? These are not self-assessment decisions that are made with a blank slate. They are made with a long historical slate. And if you have served in the U.S. Congress for a long time, you have vote after vote after vote. That is part of your record. All right? Assessment of self is a challenging one because you don't start from scratch as a presidential candidate. So I want to spend the rest of the lecture talking about assessment of self. Okay? And I was thinking about this slide, and I was thinking about what's my title to this slide, and I had a couple different titles over time, but I eventually ended up with building a candidate because I could not get out of my mind the notion of with my younger kids going to a store, the Build-A-Bear store, all right? And you'd start at one end of an assembly line and you would pick out a teddy bear and the fur or the fabric or something. And then you'd then pick out the eyes and the nose and the stuffing and all this, and you would move down the assembly line and build the bear that you want. And you could pick many different sizes, colors, types of bears, so on and so forth. And you'd build a bear. And that was really cool. I remember doing that. My kids liked it. So I might have enjoyed it. And so how do you build a candidate? Well, it's both start from scratch and not start from scratch. You probably don't get to choose as a candidate that I'm going to be this size of a bear. okay? Or I'm going to have this kind of a look or whatever. You have to really start with parameters already. I want to focus in this lecture on the 2020 Democratic candidates and the candidates that they have sought to build and the implications of those choices for them. I think my kind of clicker's dying on battery, so I'll have to kind of stand over here. Oh, so imagine we're in a grocery store now. I'm going to switch metaphors from the Build-A-Bear, and now we're in grocery stores. Aisle A is titled Ideological Identity. You got to pick something, and on the left side of that aisle is one thing, and on the right side of the aisle is another thing. And it isn't unlimited. If you're going to run to be the Democratic Party candidate, it's not like there are unlimited ideological identities to pick there. You go down the cereal aisle in real life, and there's a billion cereals, right? It isn't that way. It isn't that nuanced. There really are two kind of lanes to run in the Democratic primary. There's the left and the center left. Those are the two lanes to run in. You really can't run in the Democratic primary today as a true centrist. Bill Clinton could, but that's not where the Democratic Party is today. The Democratic Party is a click to the left from where it was in the 1990s. So you can be left or center left, all right? It's a choice you have to make. Second aisle, now you have to be like, what's your take on Washington, D.C.? What's your perspective on what Washington, D.C. is and how it works and what it means in our society and what you will be as president? So now you're going down the aisle on like the aisle is now like Washington, D.C. What do you think? And there's perspectives on the left, there's perspectives on the right. Here you got three. You can say you want to blow it up. You're done with it. You can say, it's messed up and I'm going to change it. Or you can say, it doesn't work as well as it can, but it can work. Okay? These are the three reasonable possibilities for a Democratic candidate to select. So they're going down and they pick their ideological identity, then they go down to aisle B and they're going to decide this thing about Washington, D.C. All right? Then they get to aisle C. And aisle C is, how are you going to win? How are you going to win? If any of you have ever been in sales and you try to get someone to buy your product, you have to convince them that it's going to be useful for them in some way. For the candidate, the product they're selling is themselves. Vote me in. And so you have to convince people that if I vote for you in the primary, I'm not just voting for you in the primary, I'm voting for you because I want you to win the general election too. So you have to also play two games. You have to play, I can win the primary and I can win the general election. That is really tricky. It's really tricky. You have to be able to beat the other Democratic candidates and also at the same time say, here's how I'm going to win in the fall when I run against Donald Trump. You have to be able to articulate that route to victory. All right, so now you're in aisle C, and the possible options here are I'm going to fire up my supporters, our supporters, or I'm going to woo independents and maybe even some disaffected Republicans. Okay? So on one side you got, hey, this is the independent moderates, kind of maybe disaffected Republicans. Over here is the base of the party. I'm going to fire them up and get them really excited. And then finally, in aisle D, you have to win big with a key party voting bloc, or you will not win the primary. You cannot be moderately popular with all of them. It doesn't work. You've got to win big with one key party bloc because that bloc gives you news coverage, it gives you people who defend you, it gives a state or two that you're going to win for sure. You've got to have a key party bloc. And in the Democratic Party, these are the key voting blocs. African Americans are the most consistently voting Democratic body of folks in this country. Latinx folks are not far behind African Americans, are a strong bloc in the Democratic Party. Women, these days in America, vote about 55 to 45 Democrats. So they're definitely more Democratic. Younger voters, very strongly swung towards Democrats, starting with Obama in 2008, and further pushed that way by Trump in 2016. Or older voters who have traditionally been Democrats and are not living in Florida, okay? Because I'm pretty sure that like everybody over the age of 60 in Florida lives in a village and is very conservative, because this is where Trump spends half of his time campaigning. Older voters are really important in the party, in the primary, because they vote. They vote. These younger voters, you can get them fired up, but are they going to vote? Right? So you got to win one of these blocks. As you're trying to navigate this, you're going down the grocery store aisles and you're trying to get all these things and put a cart together that's going to win, that's going to convince people to vote for you in the primary because they think you can win in aisle C. And the way they know you're going to win in aisle C is only if you can win somebody in aisle D, first of all. It's really complicated. It's strategic. It is inevitably strategic from the beginning. And so you have to, and this is the grand challenge of it all, you have to be the most strategic, calculating individuals that you can imagine, while not seeming like it, all right? You have to come off as authentic. You have to fake authenticity, okay? That's a joke, all right? Because I don't actually think you fake authenticity. The actual way you do be authentic is you be transparent. These are the choices I've made. These are the reasons I've made these choices. You may not be with me, and I accept that. But I have made these strategic choices, and these are why. All right? So the way you be strategic and be authentic is you be honest about your choices. You don't deny that there's a choice that I'm here in Iowa. Yeah. Okay? 4 aisles in building a candidate. What I want to do at this point is take the 5 top candidates and walk through the aisles. It's like we're going grocery shopping with each of them, okay? This shouldn't be too difficult in several respects. Elizabeth Warren, she's in the left, right? Not as far left as when she started the campaign, right? But definitely still left. What's her view on Washington? Blow it up. Big structural change. She wants to blow it up. Not as much as Bernie does, but she wants to blow it up. What's her electoral victory path? This or this? Fire up supporters, right? So that's the Warren pathway. The problem is, to date, Warren got here and didn't get here. She hasn't gotten to D. She got stopped on aisle C. She may be in aisle D now. I'm going to get to that in a few minutes. But she got to aisle C. And you know how, remember, she rocketed up for a while? She went up in the polls. And in fact, when you look at the betting markets, because there are betting markets on politics, just like sports betting markets, there are betting markets on politics. And this is all legal. You can bet on this. And she was up and dominating the betting markets in the middle of 2019. Overwhelmingly up there as the predicted choice. But she couldn't take the turn into aisle D. Okay? So I'm going to leave Warren there for a few minutes and come back to Warren. Next up, Bernie Sanders. Laughed. Blow it up. Fire up supporters. Now, does Bernie get to aisle D? He does get to aisle D, doesn't he? Right? It's younger voters, right? Damn, he got to aisle D in 2016, too, right? He got there. So Bernie's like, I'm in aisle D, Elizabeth. And you're over there in aisle C, right? And so Bernie pretty much started in aisle D because of 2020. And nobody has come along and taken these voters away from him. Nobody has. So when you've got a block, when you got one of the key blocks, you are going to be in it for the long haul. All right, so Bernie has got that. He's in aisle D. All right, next up, Pete Buttigieg. Center left. Now he's a change. He's change. Yeah, just wait a second. We'll stay on aisle B for a second. He definitely talks about change, that he's going to bring change to Washington. He says this every day, but yesterday he said it and pissed off a lot of people. He said, maybe we should bring people to Washington instead of electing somebody in Washington. That doesn't piss anybody off. That's a fairly common thing to say. But then he said, maybe we should elect someone who can actually walk to a cornfield instead of just seeing them on TV. Well, why would you pick a cornfield as an imagery? I don't know where you came up with that, okay? Where did you come up, like in a cornfield, right? But he pissed off a lot of urban folks who are like, damn it, I can't see a cornfield, and much of America lives where they can't see cornfields. But he was talking to Iowa voters, and that's why I said cornfield. What about this? What's his victory path? Woo independence, right? So he's in aisle C. Just to give you a sense of this, in aisle C, in Iowa, and literally you can parse the map, geographical map in Iowa. The eastern part of Iowa are the supporters, the fired up Democratic base. The western part of Iowa are more conservative. Elizabeth Warren has campaigned west of Des Moines, which is right in the middle of the state, one time in the last 6 months. Okay? One time. Pete Buttigieg lives in the western part of the state. All right? So he's got wooing independence. But does he get to aisle D? Has Pete gotten to aisle D? Older voters? He hasn't gotten younger from Bernie? Women? Latinx? Don't make me laugh over here. Okay? His biggest problem are these two blocks right here. Right? So Buttigieg has been stopped in aisle C. He and Elizabeth Warren are hanging out in aisle C. And they're both like, damn, we got to get over to aisle D. All right. Amy Klobuchar. Center left. She's a make it work. Yep, going to make it work. It's screwed up, but I've gotten it done. I'm the one that's gotten those bills passed. I've gotten it done. I'm the one that can make this place work. Her electoral victory path is woo independence, right? Because there is this like predictive bit. Like if you're going to blow up Washington, you're probably not wooing independence, right? So it gets to be fairly predictive by the time you get to aisle C. But has Klobuchar gotten to aisle D? Damn, no. She hasn't. I really like Amy Klobuchar as a candidate. I really think she could win quite comfortably in the fall, but I don't know if she can get through the primary. Right? So she hasn't won over African Americans or Latinx. She has been definitely talking to women about being a woman, but she's never worn it as a real badge of kind of her gender identity. She hasn't pursued younger voters, and she hasn't won over older voters in a particular way. Okay, so she's in aisle C. So you've got these incredible, talented people in aisle C that are playing Scrabble. All right? And over in aisle D is Bernie Sanders. All right? And then you got Joe Biden. Okay? So what's Joe? Is Joe left or center left? Center left. Sorry, he's going to make it work. In fact, he's so down for making it work that he pisses off all these Democrats by embracing people that the Democrats long ago decided we hate. Right? Right? I mean, he's like, I'm so going to make it work. I will work with people who despise us. Right? I think he's really struggled with that message until he came up with the way to phrase it. He said, there should be nobody who would be more angry at the Republicans than me, given the way they've treated my son. Right? But I am still determined to work with them. That's pretty tough to fight against. Okay? He suffered at their hands. All right? So he wants to woo independence. But has Joe got to aisle D? Yeah. Joe has been living in aisle D, all right? Joe So sorry, he's wooing independence. Joe over here has gotten older voters and he's gotten African American voters. So when you look at the crosstabs of polls and you look at voters over 45, Biden way ahead. And you look at black voters, Biden way ahead. Right? So Biden has got 2 voting blocks. This does not mean he's going to win for sure, but it does mean that it really doesn't matter what kind of campaign you run. As long as you are around and a decent human being, those blocks will say, I'm with you, because we have 30 plus years of experience with you. Right? So Joe Biden has got 2 really important voting blocks in the Democratic primary. It's why he has survived and is still at the top of the polls, even though his campaign at best has been mediocre. Right? At best. All right, so I want to go back to the aisle C folks. Because like they're not like happily like hunkered down in aisle C. They're trying to find ways to get to aisle D. All right? So let's start with Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren has worked very hard to appeal to African Americans. She has traveled around this country, has built platforms and policy around African Americans, particularly African American women, and at one point looked like she was making some real inroads, but didn't get like far enough along, at least yet. So she's tried. She has definitely tried to reach younger voters. Absolutely. She hasn't really sought to reach Latinx or older voters that much. And then she made a shift in the last 2 weeks and said, I'm going all in on the fact that I'm a woman and that America needs a female president. All right? She has talked about her gender identity. She has talked about the fact that America should have a female president. And how exactly determined she is, we know how thoughtful this is on her part because she came to the last debate ready to deliver the line of the debate. She did not come up with this line on this moment because you have to research this line in order to deliver it. In which she said, all the male candidates up on the stage have lost 10 elections. The only candidates on the stage that have not lost an election are Amy and me. Right? Wow. That's solid. That's really solid. That's really good. You do not just make that up on the stage because you don't know that about them. It's exactly the kind of statement you have ready to go when you're trying to make this appeal. So I'm going to say that she is making inroads among women. I think she is. All right? And so she has gone all in on it as a strategy. We will know in a short amount of time whether she is making enough inroads among women. I don't know about that. But she has decided that she needs somebody in aisle D. And that is correct. She does need a block in aisle D. All right. What about Pete? Mayor Pete. I love when Amy Klobuchar always calls him mayor. She goes, mayor? She's like so ice-blooded cold about this stuff. She's so good. But Mayor Pete, so you think about all these folks, Pete polls pretty consistently among African Americans at less than 1% nationally. He has all kinds of issues on that front. Among Latinx folks, it's about 5%. Not good, all right? Women, he doesn't really register good or bad with them. No, and you would think that younger voters are his people. But in actuality, these are his people. Right? So that's who Pete's going for, is older voters. When you look at those higher level age-wise crosstabs, Buttigieg is second behind Joe Biden. You got a question?
Yeah, is there a reason you don't have the LGBTQ?
Well, why don't I have LGBTQ? They're not a significant enough voting block size.
Oh, they're not?
Not in terms of percentage. African Americans will make up by the end of the primary about a third of all voters in the Democratic primary. All right? About a third. These folks will make up about a quarter. Women will make up well over half. Younger voters will be about a quarter, and older voters will be about 40%. LGBTQ will be maybe 10% in the entire voting block. Right? It's not that they're not an important constituency, but they don't carry enough heft electorally. So Buttigieg, his best voting bloc are older voters. And there has been all kinds of stuff on the internet written about why Buttigieg is despised by younger voters. I mean, and I read this stuff like nonstop because it's really interesting how he rubs a number of younger people wrong, particularly like certain kinds of progressive millennials who really see him as the antithesis of what they want to blow up America. And he's like, let's make it work. Let's woo independence. And by the way, I went to Harvard and then I served in the military. And so he has really annoyed a number of younger people. I mean, like a number. They're right here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So go to The Atlantic. The Atlantic's got a great story about this, like why is Buttigieg pissed off all these younger millennials, right? And it's got to do with the pedigree, the Harvard pedigree, the way he carries himself. He's the kind of like goody two-shoes kind of person, all this stuff, right? Now, is he a credible up-and-comer? Absolutely. But he is not resonating with younger voters. Joe Biden is doing way better among younger voters than Pete is. So, but Buttigieg is smart and strategic, and he's making his play for older voters, independent older voters. You can win Iowa from Western Iowa with older independent voters, okay? All right, then Amy Klobuchar. Klobuchar has really struggled to like pick and cement and work hard on one of these, all right? And so she's done her most to try to appeal to what I'll call a brand new category, okay? And I give them full strategic credit because given the results in the 2016 campaign, this argument is not without salience. Like the Democrats need to win the Midwest, right? So Klobuchar is all in on that. At a various point in time, she was definitely making the case that women voters, but she just never really grew on them enough, okay? So then she went all in with, I'm the Midwesterner, I'm the one who can win. And I give them credit. Strategically, they made their choices and they've gone all for it. So much so that we have the nomination, the endorsement the other day from the New York Times endorsing Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar. And you go to Amy Klobuchar's website, to her campaign's Twitter feed in the day after that endorsement. And it definitely showed an endorsement there. But it was not the New York Times endorsement. It was the Quad City Times endorsement in Iowa. All right? Right? This is her brand. Right? This is not going to be enough. It's not. Okay? But I give them strategic credit for trying. All right, so you have strong aisle D presence by Joe Biden, and you have a very strong Bernie presence in aisle D with younger voters. All right? The other folks here are making their play. Elizabeth Warren is playing to women voters as much as she can right now, and will peel off some younger voters in that. And older voters, Buttigieg is making his play. That leaves this group as the wild card, right? This folks right here who will be really important in Arizona, a Texas, a Florida. So Castro endorses Warren, right? It's mattered. But the person who does the very best among Latinx or Latina people right now is Bernie Sanders. Okay? Bernie Sanders can win the damn thing. Okay? I think Bernie Sanders can win the primary. I don't know if he can win the general. Okay? But he can win this primary. All right? And so this is it. These are the voting blocks that are going to carry the day. All right? But I'm going to spend about the last 10 minutes talking about African Americans because they are the most crucial voting bloc on the Democratic side. And there's 3 reasons why they're the most crucial voting bloc, and it's why Biden still sits in the best position as of today. Okay? First, They are bigly represented in the crucial 6 weeks of the Democratic primary. It's my favorite Trump word, all right? Because as a communication person, I'm fascinated by the fact that we don't know if he's saying bigly or big league. We don't know, right? And I just have to respect that he makes it unknowable to us, all right? But the African American voters are really big time represented, by which I mean there's a lot of these voters in a crucial 6 weeks of the Democratic primary. So I want to show you this over time. This is a great New York Times graphic. This is the dates by month of the states voting. So February through June. Voting starts on February 3rd in Iowa. This is the percentage of voters in each state who are Black Americans, African Americans. This line right here, and it will go all the way across, is what the national Democratic average is of all African American, of all states. The average across all the states, when you go state by state by state by state over time, is at 23%. African Americans, right? That's not Seattle, right? Right? So this is the average across all the states, and this is the states mapped over time by percentage of Black voters in each state. I'm just going to start with the first 4 states. Okay, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. 60% in South Carolina, right? These are the first 4. And that is a crucial period of time. I made the argument last week about why those first 4 states matter so much. And they do, all right? It is possible a candidate, Biden or somebody else, comes out of those first 4 and has a really strong lock on the nomination. But it is also quite possible, given the closeness of the race, that they come out of this muddled close together. Just a couple. A Warren, a Biden, a Sanders, a Warren, a Biden, a Buttigieg, something like this. A Sanders and Buttigieg and Biden, I don't know, okay? And Klobuchar, if somehow things magically lined up for her in Iowa, and is not out of the realm of possibility in Iowa for her. But these are the first 4. Then you have a 6-week window in here that is the crucial 6-week window that I'm referencing, in which the numbers of states that vote are many, and it looks like this. That's the percent of the Black population in those states in those 6 weeks. In those 6 weeks, from the end of February till the beginning of April. I think Wisconsin votes on April 7th, I think. And between the end of February, and Wisconsin is not on here, Wisconsin's going to be lower. Between that period of time, there's a 6-week window when Black voters make up very large percentages in the states that are going to be voting. And then you go the rest of the primary, and they're back down here. So if you're going to be a voting bloc that is going to be concentrated in certain moments in the primary, unless you're completely concentrated at the beginning, this window right in here is a very concentrated key window to win the election. And it is indeed this window in 2008 in which Barack Obama won the Democratic nomination. Barack Obama won 13 states in a row in the Democratic nomination in here. And then Clinton won in Ohio and in Texas and began to come back. But his lead had opened up. Okay? So they're a crucial set of voters at a really definitive moment in the primary sequencing. Second, they historically have coalesced for one candidate. The African American voters in the Democratic Party are, research suggests, quite pragmatic about how they vote. They think a lot about all the trade-offs that have to go into account. In fact, there was a great story in the New York Times the other day, I believe it was the New York Times, about the challenges that Elizabeth Warren has had with Black voters because they see her grand, enormous arguments as things that will not filter down to them. They say, this is really great, but you know what? It's never going to get to us. It's never going to get there to us. All right? So we love the ideas, but they aren't going to get to us. We need real change now. So they historically have coalesced in a very pragmatic way behind one candidate. If you look at the exit polls in the Democratic primary in all the last sequencing of competitive primaries, 92, there's not a competitive primary in 96, 2000 there is, 04 there is, 08 there is, there's not one in 12 as a competitive primary, in 2016. This is the percent of black voters who voted for William Jefferson Clinton, Bill Clinton. Okay? 77% of all black voters in the Democratic primary voted for Bill Clinton. Okay? 2000 Al Gore, 82% for Al Gore. All right? How did that happen? He ran against Bill Bradley. And Bill Bradley did not draw black support because he was seen as way too idealistic as a candidate. 2004, John Kerry, he's the low water mark, okay? But even he crosses 50, gets to 54% of African American voters. Barack Obama in 2008 gets to just about, just below Gore, all right? And then 2016, Hillary Clinton, just below Obama, all right? This is extremely large vote block to begin with. The largest vote block outside of women in those listings that I had, and they are overwhelmingly behind one candidate. If women voted this way for a candidate, that candidate would coast to the nomination. Coast to it. So historically, black voters have coalesced for one candidate. Just to give you a sense of what this looked like in 2016, after we got through the first 4 states and we got to the next cluster of these key states, Hillary Clinton began to run away with the nomination among black voters. These are the percentages of victories she had among black voters in these states. In Alabama, she won 91-6 over Sanders. In Arkansas, it was 91-9 over Sanders. In Georgia, it was 85-14. In Mississippi, it was 89-11. Nevada, 76-22 over Sanders. Oklahoma, 71-27. South Carolina, 86-14. Tennessee, 89-10. Texas, 83-15. Virginia, 84-16. These are not small margins. These are massive winning margins. Bakari Sellers, who's the son of a great civil rights hero in South Carolina, and Bakari himself has been a state senator. Bakari Sellers said, as they approached South Carolina in 2016, my mother and her friends are going to win this election for Hillary Clinton. Black women in South Carolina turned that election around for Hillary Clinton, the nomination. And Sanders never recovered. Sanders is doing better among black voters this time, but not in the same caliber as Biden. And then third, African American voters have a significant presence in general election key states. So again, you got to have the two-step dance. You got to be able to win the primary and then also keep these voters and mobilize them in the general election. So black voters happen to be arrayed in this country in kind of 3 major areas politically. All right, and 2 of those really matter in the presidential election. This is the 2020 map that my colleagues in Common Purpose and I are focused on. All the blue states are the states that we are going to deploy and engage in. So if you're not already engaged with us, we'd love to have you. We have this awesome workshop tomorrow night where people are going to be talking about each of these states and making the pitches for why you ought to go there. All right, these are 19 different states that we're going to be engaged in. These states represent basically all the key political states, except for Washington, which doesn't really count. But we live here, so we engage here. So the other 18 are where the election of the presidency and the Senate will be decided. Those states. When you look at those states, there are 3 pockets where African American voters are primarily distributed in significant ways. 2 of them really matter. First, you got this Midwestern Rust Belt. Large African American pockets from Milwaukee through Detroit and Lansing and Flint, into Ohio and Cleveland and Columbus and Cincinnati, through Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. African American voters did not turn out, both because of not excited and also voter suppression in those states. in 2016 in significant ways. And so if the Democratic nominee is going to win in 2020, those states, African American voters are going to be crucial to it. So that's one of the key blocks. And then you've got the second block down here, which is the growing kind of Democratic area. Virginia has flipped to the Democrats. The governor, 2 U.S. senators, a majority of the state legislature, and the presidency have all gone Democratic in Virginia in the last decade, all right? It is now a blue state, all right? Largely because of African American voters. Very significant population of well-educated black voters in that state. North Carolina, same trend line. Not quite there for North Carolina, but getting there. In 2008, it did vote for Barack Obama. It is a battleground state in 2020 for the Senate and the presidency. Georgia's on its way there. It's gonna get there eventually. Has 2 U.S. Senate races in 2020. It has a electorate that right now has a approval rating of Trump. Well, actually, not approval rating. 43% in a poll that just came out 2 days ago in the state say that they will vote for Donald Trump for sure. 43%. 46% say they will for sure not vote for Donald Trump. That's competitive, all right? Now, the fundamentals of the state are more Republican, so you expect that they'll lean back towards Trump, but that's where you get to make turnout can matter, right? And Florida, forever been deeply contested. It was decided by 112,000 votes in 2020. It's been decided historically in the last several elections by about 1 or 2%, and African American voters are vital in that state. So they're there, and they large chunk here as well. This tends to be a very red part of the country, but in the Democratic primary, those black voters in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri really, really matter. So they don't matter as much in the general election in that third cluster, but they matter in the primary. So those 3 reasons make Democratic black voters the most important. So here's my kind of takeaway bit at the end of this lecture. The upshot is that African American voters are vital for Democratic nomination contenders now and the Democratic Party's potential 2020 success. If I only had one voting bloc in ILD that loved me as a candidate and wanted to support me and would stand by me thick and thin, I would take African American voters, okay? And it is one of the greatest, and I struggled as I thought about the way I was going to say this. I don't know what the right word is exactly. So it's an irony, and it's also exactly the right thing that African American voters hold this much sway. Okay? For all the voter suppression and violence that they have faced as Americans for so long in this country, it's ironic, I think if I'm using the word, I don't know if that's the right word, it's ironic that they get to hold this much sway, and also, damn it, it's the right thing. All right? It's the right thing. I have had the privilege to spend time with a number of African Americans in the South around some civil rights work that I've done. And I want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, these are the most patriotic people in this country, all right? They have fought and died for this country, and they will continue to fight and die for this country. So the least the Democratic Party could do would prioritize them. It's the least we could do, all right? Which brings me to the New York Times endorsement, okay? So the New York Times comes out with this endorsement. And the New York Times does not have a good track record on endorsements, okay? The people they pick do not tend to win very often. They're about 50-50 on the Democratic nomination, and they're about 40% on the general election endorsements. They've picked nothing but Democrats since John Kennedy in the general election. So like if you just do the math, the Republicans have won the presidency quite a bit, right? So they haven't done well in the general, but they also haven't done that well in the endorsements of the Democratic nomination. In 2016, they did pick Hillary Clinton, and she did win the nomination. In 2008, they picked Hillary Clinton, and she did not win the nomination. 2004, they picked John Kerry, and John Kerry did win the nomination. 2000, they picked they picked Al Gore, and Al Gore went on to win the nomination. And then you go back in time, they picked Bill Clinton, but they didn't pick Clinton. No way did they pick Clinton in 92. because nobody thought that Clinton was going to win. So their record is about 50-50 as you go back in time in the last couple decades in the Democratic nomination. They have picked a female. They picked Clinton twice. So this is not a groundbreaking endorsement that they delivered, but they did. It was delivered. It is groundbreaking in that they nominated two people, right? So they nominated Elizabeth Warren and or endorsed Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar, and it's really an interesting endorsement that they've written about them. It's a long endorsement, and actually, when I read what they wrote, I really think they only really endorsed Amy Klobuchar. Okay, it is not a very favorable set of statements about Elizabeth Warren that they have in there. It's not it's not really overly critical of her, but nor is it a love for her. Amy Klobuchar gets a lot of praise in that endorsement. And at the end of it, they have the historical sentence, let the best woman win, right? And that's really incredible. And I'm thrilled we're at this moment. But actually, it is not the most important New York Times endorsement that happened, all right? And I'm quite serious on this. So in the New York Times, when they were creating the endorsement process, they had all the candidates come to the New York Times over many days and do interviews with the New York Times. And all of those interviews are available online. You can read them. There are some really deep, meaningful stuff in those questions. And as part of this, because this is the digital age, they created little video vignettes about the candidates. So you can find some of those vignettes around the internet. The Times is promoting them because it's the Times' brand. But it's also really interesting being promoted. They're being promoted by certain candidates too, because they're vignettes of the candidates. So there's an incredible moment where Andrew Yang is being interviewed by the New York Times editorial board, and they say to Yang, "Would you have interest in being mayor of New York City?" And Yang's answer is, "Well, after 8 years of being president, I'll see if my appetite is still good for that." All right? And I'm like, props to Yang, right? Yang doesn't blink, nothing. He doesn't get defensive or pissed, like, what are you saying? Just says, after I've been president for 8 years, I'll see if I have appetite for that, all right? There's a Cory Booker vignette where Booker's asked, when is a time you've had your heart broken? And Booker gathers himself and then delivers this most unbelievably devastating and inspiring statement about watching young black men die in the streets of Newark, right? And it's just unbelievably riveting, and I love the guy and his heart so much. And so to see him talk about this and what it meant to him and to America is amazing. And there is a vignette with Joe Biden also. And in that vignette, Joe Biden is getting on an elevator to go up to the editorial board room. And the documentarian is with them. It's a New York Times documentarian, and is filming this moment when Biden gets on the elevator. And when he gets on the elevator, there is a security guard. And the security guard is a young African-American female. And she says, "Oh my God, I love you, Joe Biden. I love you." She is absolutely moved to be in the presence of Joe Biden. And Joe Biden says, "What's your name?" And she says, "Jacqueline." And he says, "Would you like do you have a phone? Because I'll be happy to take a photo with you." And she goes, "Oh my God, really?" And the vignette ends with him taking a photo with her, all right? This has gone absolutely viral on the internet by strategic Biden campaign folks. So I want to show you this clip, okay? I heard someone say over here, "Is this staged?" It's not, because several people who have watched this have said they know the security guard, and that's their favorite security guard at the New York Times. They all love her, and so this is a very authentic moment to them, they've said.
I'm great. I love you.
I'm going to let it loop a couple times.
I do. You're like my favorite of my.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Jacqueline.
You got a camera? As we get out, we'll take one, okay?
You are awesome. Oh my gosh. I'm great. I love you.
Thank you.
I do. You're like my
Thank you.
favorite of my.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Jacqueline.
You got a camera? As we get out, we'll take one, okay?
You are awesome. Oh my gosh.
You.
I'm great. I love you.
Thank you.
I do. You're like my
Thank you.
favorite of my.
Thank you so much. What's your name?
Jacqueline.
You got a camera? As we get out, we'll take one, okay?
You are awesome. Oh my gosh.
You.
I'm great. I love you.
Thank you.
I do.
So I didn't pull up all the Twitter stuff, but after this went viral, the Biden campaign put out a tweet with this and said, "We endorse Jacqueline." All right? And Jacqueline responded, I'm sure with their encouragement, "I endorse Joe Biden for president of the United States." If I'm Joe Biden, I will take that over the New York Times endorsement 7 days of the week. All right? Because that's him with a person in the key voting block, right? So the strategy behind this is significant, but it was a moment that they captured and have used to their advantage among a key voting block. So here we go, folks. The Iowa caucuses start in 2 weeks, February 3rd. I mean, they don't start, they are. They are. The South Carolina primary, which wraps up the first 4 early states, is Saturday, February 29th. Super Tuesday, where more than a dozen states vote, comes 3 days after the South Carolina primary. That becomes a national primary at that point. Okay? My April lectures will begin again. It's pretty much as important as those other 3 things, okay? In April, right? The New York Times will do a documentary about my lectures, I'm sure, okay? All right? My focus will be on the Republicans. I am opening lecture sales tonight for the next wave. I will not be announcing these to anybody else other than the lecture attendees until Friday of this week. All right? So you've got this. You've got the first crack at this, if you want to. It's the name of the lecture series, A New Birth of Freedom, April 2020, brownpapertickets.me, or just go to Brown Paper Tickets and search A New Birth of Freedom, and you'll find the April 2020 lectures. I'd love to have you. So I would not make any bets on this election, on this primary. It's really competitive. It's really competitive. I think I can see Elizabeth Warren emerging. I can see Bernie Sanders emerging. I can see Joe Biden emerging. And in some unexpected but potential scenarios, I can see Amy Klobuchar or Pete Buttigieg emerging. I can see them all right? If I was going to put money on this, all right, I've told you who I would bet on. I would bet on Joe Biden because of his support among 2 constituencies in ILD. Right? I would bet on them. Historically, those have been very important. But the one thing I did not get at is the level of enthusiasm in ILD. I talked about the fact of whether they're beloved among them, like they've won over that group. But who will run through the wall and come out in the caucuses when it's freezing? Right? Who will do that? And Sanders has got an edge on this. He does. Right? So I really don't know. All I would say is we're in historic times. If you want to go to South Carolina, there's still a few seats on that bus. That's a fundraiser for Common Purpose. It's a way for you to support this work and also see this stuff up close and personal. Otherwise, we have, from the work that I do with Common Purpose, we have a really important workshop tomorrow night. If you want to hear about that, if you don't know about it, please join us. We have introductory workshops every second Saturday of the month, and we're ready to go. We are going nonstop already And we're going to go all the way through this year. It's day 21. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop there and see what questions we have. Okay, go ahead. What about Bloomberg? Bloomberg is a tough choice, not a tough choice, but a tough strategic situation. If all the states voted on the same day, then the fact that Bloomberg isn't competing in the first 4 states would not really be that big a deal. In fact, he might be just at a great advantage because he's already dropped whatever, 50, 60, 70 million, right, on ads. So he's put down a ton of money. And he can win these other states, a California, a Texas, where he's putting in he's pushing hard in Texas. But states don't all vote on one day. They vote sequentially in the primary. In the presidential election, everybody votes the same day, but in the primary, it's sequential. And so Bloomberg has to do what no one has ever done on the Republican or Democratic side, which is not win any of the first 4 states, not even compete in the first 4 states, and somehow gather enough momentum after that. 3 days after South Carolina, very difficult to imagine him doing that. Very difficult to imagine that. Anything's possible, of course, but I certainly would not be betting on Mike Bloomberg. However, I will say this about Bloomberg. Bloomberg a year ago was pissing me off. It was pissing me off because he was saying that he would really only support certain Democratic candidates, right? And he would say, no way Warren, no way Sanders, no way any of the kind of left-leaning, far left or left-leaning folks. Bloomberg has now changed his mind on that and has said that he will devote his money against Trump for any nominee on the Democratic Party side. He is basically going to run a shadow campaign, okay? And he has already hired thousands of field organizers around this country to do work. I don't think that we should minimize this. This is a big deal. This guy has got all the money in the world. He's got a great message on gun safety, and he's running ads right now in all of these vulnerable Republican Senate states on impeachment against Trump. So I think Bloomberg is going to be really important. I just don't think he's going to be the nominee. Okay.
Do you think that'll bring a different strategy than bring all the Democrats together behind whoever the nominee is after the pain of Bernie people not coming to Hillary? Do you think it'll be different this time because of people like Bloomberg?
Okay, the question is, there's 2 questions there. Do I think that the pain of the Democratic Party will be able to be overcome in a way it just didn't get overcome satisfactorily in 2016? And do I think that Bloomberg could help in that endeavor? I don't know. 'Cause who are we really talking about here who might not vote for the Democratic nominee? We're really only talking about one set of voters out there. It's Bernie Sanders' supporters. That's all we're really talking about here. And that's some of you. I get that. But we're not talking about Joe Biden supporters not voting, because Biden is like, man, I'm going to be out there campaigning for everybody. It's not Cory Booker's supporters. It is Bernie Sanders supporters. I don't think the last 2 weeks has been helpful for the Democratic nomination in terms of a unity, right? I think it's been really challenging. However, Sanders himself has been very clear from the beginning of this election that we have one goal, it's to beat Trump. One goal, right? And he could have taken a shot today at Hillary Clinton, because I do not know what Hillary Clinton was doing when she issued her statements that she knew were going to come out that were quite critical of Bernie Sanders. When they were going to come out, I don't know, but they were going to come out, and they are very critical and demeaning of Bernie Sanders. She did this, they came out today, and Bernie Sanders said, I've got one job, it's impeachment right now, and then beating Donald Trump, all right? So I think Sanders is going to work harder on his folks. So I think there will be greater unity because Trump will compel that, right? And the reality is the Democrats need to work so hard to make sure that with or without that small clusters of Sanders supporters who might say, I'm not going to, if they had to, we're going to vote for a Biden, or I'm not going to vote for a Buttigieg, just no way in hell, that becomes not determinative. And Bloomberg could help on that just because of the power of his advertising and the field organizers. Yeah, sure, back there in the yellow.
Historically, when it comes to ILD, where is the union? Was union at all a compelling ILD bloc, and where is it today?
Yeah, that's a good question. What about union voters? And are they a union D? Are they an ILD bloc? Historically, without question, unions have been an ILD voter bloc. They left ILD in 1980 when Ronald Reagan ran for president. They left ILD for the Democrats, and they're darn near ILD for the Republicans now. They're kind of split between the two parties. They have been strong Democratic supporters, and labor unions do turn out the vote and mobilize to get out the vote, but they don't have absolute control over their constituencies, right? And so union voters are a slightly Democratic constituency, but in a number of the kind of key battleground states, they swung towards Trump in 2016. So they're not an ILD for the Democrats for sure. Yeah. Yep. Contested convention. I think it's possible. I think we'll know after the first four how likely it is. If after the first four we have like a Bernie winning or a Warren winning in Iowa, a Bernie winning in New Hampshire, and a Biden winning in South Carolina, then I think we're looking at the possibility of a contested election. At the same time, if Biden retains the support among black voters that he has now, he should be the nominee. If he retains that support, he is up by about 35 to 40 points nationally among black voters, among the Democrats. If he retains that, he should be the nominee. But that could get chipped away. That can definitely get chipped away. I will say this. 2 possible scenarios could come out of the first 4 states that are a scenario in which somebody is way out ahead. The first is I could see Bernie Sanders winning Iowa and then winning New Hampshire, and Warren fading away. And under that scenario, we then go south, and Biden has to win if it's going to be close, has to win in South Carolina. Otherwise Sanders goes with it. Scenario 2 is I could see Biden winning them all. I could see him winning them all. And South Carolina being the capper to it. Like, it's done now, I'm winning big time. I can see either of those. More likely, I think it's competitive coming out of all of those early ones. A contested election does not do anybody any good. Not good. For drama, as a person who studies this stuff, fascinated. I'd be fascinated by it. As a citizen and as someone who's like all in on this, I don't want it. Nope. Sure.
What's the impact of the impeachment process on those voter blocks?
What's the impact of the impeachment process on those voting blocks? All of them, it fires them all up. All of the folks in ILD are core Democratic supporters. They wanted the Democrats to pursue impeachment. They want to see the Democrats stand up for them. They want to see the Democrats fight against this horrible human being that is Donald Trump. So I think it fires up all of them. What is the impact on the independents that were in aisle C? That's the key thing on impeachment. Right now, it looks fairly favorable for Democrats, actually. Independents, by a slight majority, favor the removal of Donald Trump. And then we know from the polls that have been out that 2/3 of Americans, including over 60% of independents, want a trial that has witnesses. Okay? So if the Republicans refuse that, they will take their political lives in their own hands. All right? Yeah. Uh-huh.
But which one can win?
So you said I haven't talked about electability. You don't care which one, you just want one that's going to win, right? I actually think they can all win, and they can all lose. Right? They can all win, and they can all lose. Could I see Joe Biden winning? Absolutely. And I think if Joe Biden's a nominee, it helps Senate races in a number of states. I can absolutely see that. Can I see Joe Biden getting eviscerated over his Iraq war vote? His support for crime legislation in the 1990s? For some of the dumb things he says? Absolutely. So I can see it all the ways that it goes. I will say this. If the Democrats get out the vote, they will win. That is it. There are more Democratic voters in this country. All right? Yes. Senate versus presidency. Which one is more important? What's more important? The U.S. Senate is more important. Yep. The U.S. Senate is more important. To get Mitch McConnell out of the Senate majority position. Right? So, common purpose, folks, if you want to go to Kentucky or you want to join common purpose just to go to Kentucky, we're going. Okay? Ellen.
Given who may win this year, what's the significance of the vice presidential selection?
Yeah, great question about the VP nomination. So let's say Bernie or Biden or Elizabeth Warren are the nominees, 70 or older, all of them, right? Biden the other day was quoted as, I am old, but I'm not going to die, or something like that. I'm not dead and I'm not going to die, all right? That's a slogan to run on, I think, right there, okay? I'm not dead and I'm not going to die, okay? Solid, right? But I think that any of the nominees, any of the 5 remaining Democratic nominees, absolutely have to